The morning mist clung to the manicured gardens of Royal Lodge like a shroud, obscuring the grand Georgian mansion that had become Prince Andrew's fortress against the world. Inside the 30-room residence, the Duke of York moved through rooms that had witnessed both the pinnacle of his royal life and its spectacular collapse. The house, with its pink-washed walls and imposing columns, had been his sanctuary for over 20 years, but now it felt more like a prison from which he refused to escape. Andrew stood at the tall windows of his study, gazing out at the 98 acres of pristine parkland that surrounded his home. The irony was not lost on him that he was fighting harder to keep this house than he had fought to keep his reputation. The sprawling estate, nestled within the Windsor Great Park, had been the stage for countless family gatherings, diplomatic receptions, and private moments that now seemed like memories from another lifetime. Every corner of the property told a story of better days, when he was still the Queen's favorite son, when his military service was celebrated rather than overshadowed by scandal, when the future seemed as solid as the ancient oak trees that dotted his grounds. The lease agreement that bound him to this property was as complex as the royal family's web of relationships. In 2003, Andrew had signed a 75-year lease for the Royal Lodge, a commitment that would theoretically keep the property in his hands until 2078. The Crown Estate, which owned the building, had been satisfied with the arrangement at the time. Andrew was a working royal, recently returned from the Falklands War as a decorated helicopter pilot, and seemed destined for a long and distinguished royal career. The annual rent of £260,000 seemed manageable for a prince who enjoyed the full support of the monarchy and access to its considerable resources. But 20 years later, everything had changed. The lease that once represented security now felt like a millstone around his neck. The financial obligations extended far beyond the annual rent. Andrew was responsible for maintaining the massive property, a task that required hundreds of thousands of pounds each year. The roof needed constant attention, the heating system required frequent updates, and the grounds demanded a small army of gardeners and maintenance staff. These were expenses that had been manageable when Andrew enjoyed his mother's financial support and maintained his position as a working royal. Now, with his royal income stripped away and his access to royal resources severely limited, every maintenance bill felt like another step toward inevitable defeat. The transformation of Andrew's circumstances had been swift and merciless. In November 2019, his disastrous interview with BBC Newsnight had begun the unraveling of his royal life. Emily Maitlis had pressed him on his relationship with Jeffrey Epstein, and Andrew's responses had been so tone-deaf and unconvincing that they immediately sparked calls for him to step back from royal duties. The prince who had once been seen as the Queen's favorite son suddenly found himself radioactive, with charities distancing themselves and business partners severing ties. The situation had deteriorated further when Virginia Giuffre filed her civil lawsuit in the United States, alleging that Andrew had sexually abused her when she was 17 years old. The prince vehemently denied all allegations, but the legal proceedings cast a shadow over the entire royal family. The Queen, despite her personal affection for her second son, found herself in an impossible position. The monarchy's reputation was at stake, and difficult decisions had to be made. In January 2022, the final blow came. Buckingham Palace announced that Andrew would be stripped of his military titles and royal patronages. The statement was brief and devastating. With the Queen's approval and agreement, the Duke of York's military affiliations and royal patronages have been returned to the Queen. The Duke of York will continue not to undertake any public duties and is defending this case as a private individual. In a few short sentences, Andrew's public life as a working royal was effectively ended. The settlement of the civil case that followed only deepened Andrew's isolation. While he continued to deny any wrongdoing, he agreed to pay a substantial sum to Virginia Giuffre, reportedly in the millions of pounds. The settlement allowed him to avoid a public trial, but came at an enormous financial cost. The funds, according to reports, came from the Queen's private resources, but this royal bailout was understood to be a one-time arrangement. Andrew could not expect such assistance in the future. As 2022 progressed, Andrew found himself in a precarious position that would have been unimaginable just a few years earlier. He was no longer a working royal, had no official income from the sovereign grant, and faced ongoing legal expenses and the massive costs of maintaining Royal Lodge. His military pension provided some income, but it was a fraction of what he needed to sustain his lifestyle and meet his property obligations. The death of Queen Elizabeth II in September 2022 marked another turning point in Andrew's circumstances. His mother had been his most consistent supporter, and her passing removed his primary source of protection within the royal family. King Charles III, now firmly established on the throne, had very different ideas about the future of the monarchy and Andrew's place within it. Charles had long believed in a streamlined royal family, focused on core working members and free from the complications that non-working royals could bring. Andrew's situation exemplified everything the new king wanted to avoid. The Duke of York was expensive to maintain, generated negative publicity, and served no useful function for the monarchy. From Charles's perspective, it made little sense for Andrew to continue living in such grand style at Royal Lodge when he was no longer contributing to the family firm. The king's position was pragmatic rather than purely personal, though the brothers' relationship had been complicated for years. Charles understood that every pound spent supporting Andrew was a pound that could not be used to support working royals or royal charities. The optics were also problematic. How could the monarchy justify spending substantial sums on maintaining a disgraced prince in a mansion while working royals like William and Catherine lived in more modest accommodations? The financial pressure on Andrew intensified throughout 2023. Reports suggested that Charles had cut off his brother's annual allowance of £249,000, which had previously helped Andrew meet his various obligations. Without this support, the Duke of York faced the stark reality of trying to maintain a massive property on a fraction of his former income. The annual rent alone consumed most of his military pension, leaving little for the property's upkeep and his other expenses. Frogmore Cottage, the former home of Prince Harry and Meghan Markle, emerged as the king's preferred alternative accommodation for his brother. The property, while still substantial and comfortable, was far more modest than Royal Lodge. It required significantly less maintenance and would represent a considerable cost saving for both Andrew and the royal family. From Charles's perspective, this arrangement made perfect sense. Andrew would still have a dignified home befitting his status as the late Queen's son, but without the enormous financial burden that Royal Lodge represented. However, Andrew viewed the suggestion to move to Frogmore Cottage as another humiliation in a series of defeats. Royal Lodge was more than just his home. It was a symbol of his status and a tangible connection to his former life as a prominent royal. The mansion represented the last vestige of his previous importance, and surrendering it would feel like accepting complete defeat. The psychological impact of such a move would be devastating for a man who had already lost so much. The standoff between the king and his brother became one of the most closely watched royal dramas of 2023. Charles held most of the cards in this dispute, controlling both Andrew's allowance and having significant influence with the crown estate. However, Andrew's lease provided him with legal protection that could not be easily overturned. The Duke of York was determined to use every available resource to maintain his position, even if it meant depleting his remaining funds in a battle he might ultimately lose. As autumn arrived at Royal Lodge, Andrew continued his daily routines in the house that had become both his sanctuary and his battlefield. The changing seasons reminded him of the many years he had called this place home, of the children who had grown up in these rooms, and of the life he had built within these walls. Every morning, as he looked out at the grounds that had witnessed both triumph and tragedy, he renewed his determination to fight for what he believed was rightfully his. The history of Royal Lodge stretched back far beyond Prince Andrew's tenancy, its walls holding centuries of royal memories, and witnessing the evolution of the British monarchy through times of crisis and celebration. Originally built in the 1750s as the Deputy Ranger's Lodge, the property had served various members of the royal family, each leaving their mark on its character and significance. For Andrew, understanding this history was crucial to his argument for why he deserved to remain in what he considered his rightful home. The most significant chapter in Royal Lodge's history began in 1931, when King George VI, then the Duke of York, moved into the property with his wife Elizabeth and their two young daughters. The future Queen Elizabeth II had spent part of her childhood within these very walls, playing in the same gardens where Andrew now walked, learning her earliest lessons about royal duty in the rooms that had become his sanctuary. The irony was profound. Andrew was fighting to remain in a house where his mother had learned to be queen, where the monarchy's future had been shaped during some of its most challenging years. George VI had transformed Royal Lodge from a relatively modest country residence into a proper royal home. The additions and improvements he made created the 30-room mansion that Andrew now occupied. The King and Queen Elizabeth had seen the property as their private retreat, a place where they could raise their daughters away from the intense scrutiny of court life. They had invested not just money, but their hearts into making Royal Lodge a true family home. During World War II, Royal Lodge had served as a weekend retreat for the royal family, a place where they could find brief respite from the pressure of leading a nation through its darkest hours. Princess Elizabeth, the future queen, had continued to visit the house regularly throughout her reign, often bringing her own children to enjoy the same gardens and rooms where she had played decades earlier. These personal connections made Andrew's attachment to the property more understandable, even to his critics. The Crown Estate's management of Royal Lodge reflected the complex relationship between private royal life and public property ownership. As the technical owner of the building, the Crown Estate had to balance its commercial interests with the special circumstances of royal occupancy. The organization understood that royal properties were not merely real estate investments, but symbols of national heritage and royal continuity. However, this understanding did not extend to indefinite subsidies for non-working royals. Andrew's lease agreement contained several crucial clauses that provided him with significant legal protection. The 75-year term was unusually long for Crown Estate properties, reflecting the special consideration given to royal tenants at the time of signing. More importantly, the lease could not be terminated early without evidence of breach of contract. As long as Andrew continued to pay his rent and maintain the property to agreed standards, the Crown Estate had limited options for forcing his departure. The maintenance obligations written into Andrew's lease were extensive and expensive. The Duke of York was responsible for all internal and external maintenance, including the preservation of the property's historic character. This requirement had seemed reasonable in 2003 when Andrew enjoyed substantial royal income and support. 20 years later, with his financial situation drastically changed, these obligations had become overwhelming burdens that threatened to drain his remaining resources. The property's condition had become a source of increasing concern as Andrew's financial difficulties mounted. Several major repairs have been deferred due to cost considerations, including work on the roof and updates to the heating system. While the house remained habitable and generally well-maintained, close observers noted signs of the financial pressure Andrew faced. The grounds, while still impressive, showed subtle signs of reduced staffing and maintenance budgets. King Charles's strategy for encouraging Andrew's departure from Royal Lodge was carefully calculated and multifaceted. Rather than attempting to break the lease directly, which would likely prove legally impossible and potentially embarrassing for the Crown, Charles focused on making Andrew's position financially untenable. By cutting off his brother's annual allowance and limiting his access to other royal resources, the king created a situation where Andrew would struggle to meet his lease obligations. The offer of Frogmore Cottage represented Charles's attempt to provide his brother with a face-saving exit from an impossible situation. The property, while significantly smaller than Royal Lodge, was still substantial and came with considerably lower maintenance costs. More importantly, the royal family would likely provide more financial support for Andrew's occupancy of Frogmore Cottage, given its reduced expenses. From Charles's perspective, this arrangement would resolve the Royal Lodge problem while ensuring that Andrew maintained appropriate accommodation. However, Andrew's rejection of the Frogmore Cottage option revealed the psychological and symbolic importance of Royal Lodge to his sense of identity. The Duke of York had lived in the mansion during the peak of his royal career, had raised his daughters there, and had entertained world leaders and dignitaries in its grand rooms. Frogmore Cottage, despite its royal connections and comfortable accommodations, could not provide the same sense of status and achievement that Royal Lodge represented. The financial mathematics of Andrew's situation grew increasingly dire as 2023 progressed. His military pension of approximately £20,000 per year covered only a fraction of his annual rent, leaving him dependent on other income sources and savings to meet his basic obligations. The property's maintenance costs, staff salaries, and his own living expenses required hundreds of thousands of pounds annually. Without his royal allowance and access to royal resources, Andrew faced the prospect of depleting his savings within a few years. Reports suggested that Andrew was exploring various income-generating options to sustain his lifestyle and maintain his hold on Royal Lodge. These efforts included potential business ventures, investment opportunities, and even consideration of commercial activities that would have been unthinkable during his time as a working royal. The desperation underlying these explorations highlighted how dramatically his circumstances had changed and how determined he was to avoid surrender. The staff at Royal Lodge found themselves in an increasingly difficult position as Andrew's financial pressures mounted. Many had worked for the Duke of York for years, developing personal loyalty and professional pride in maintaining the property to the highest standards. However, budget constraints began affecting their working conditions and job security. Some positions were eliminated or reduced to part-time status, while others saw responsibilities expanded without corresponding salary increases. Security arrangements for Royal Lodge presented another significant financial challenge for Andrew. As a member of the royal family, even a non-working one, he remained entitled to protection from the Metropolitan Police. However, the level of security provided for Royal Lodge was substantial and expensive to maintain. The property's size and location required comprehensive security measures that strained already tight budgets. Andrew understood that any reduction in security could provide his critics with additional ammunition to argue for his relocation to a smaller, more easily protected property. The media attention surrounding Andrew's situation intensified throughout 2023, with regular reports speculating about his financial difficulties and the sustainability of his position at Royal Lodge. These stories often included aerial photographs of the property, highlighting its grand scale and immaculate grounds while questioning whether such luxury was appropriate for a disgraced prince. The coverage created additional pressure on both Andrew and King Charles to resolve the situation. Public opinion on Andrew's fight to remain at Royal Lodge was largely unsympathetic. Many Britons, facing their own housing and financial challenges, found it difficult to generate support for a wealthy prince fighting to keep a mansion he could no longer afford. The optics were particularly problematic during a time of economic uncertainty and rising living costs for ordinary families. This public sentiment provided additional motivation for King Charles to resolve the situation quickly and definitively. International observers watched the Royal Lodge dispute with fascination, seeing it as a window into the changing nature of the British monarchy under King Charles. The new king's approach to Andrew's situation demonstrated his commitment to a more streamlined, cost-effective royal family. Foreign media coverage often contrasted the luxury of Royal Lodge with the more modest accommodations occupied by working royals in other European monarchies. As winter approached, the battle lines in the Royal Lodge dispute became increasingly clear. Andrew remained determined to fight for his home, viewing any compromise as an unacceptable admission of defeat. King Charles, meanwhile, appeared equally committed to resolving what he saw as an unsustainable and embarrassing situation. The stage was set for a prolonged struggle that would test both brothers' resolve and potentially reshape the public's understanding of modern royal life. The relationship between Prince Andrew and King Charles had always been complex, shaped by their different personalities, life experiences, and positions within the royal hierarchy. As the dispute over Royal Lodge intensified, their brotherly bond faced its greatest test, with personal grievances and practical considerations creating a conflict that went far beyond simple property ownership. The king's determination to streamline the monarchy clashed directly with Andrew's desperate need to maintain the last symbols of his former status, creating a situation where compromise seemed increasingly impossible. Charles had long viewed Andrew's lifestyle as excessive and problematic for the modern monarchy. Even before the Epstein scandal destroyed Andrew's reputation, the future king had questioned whether his brother's approach to royal life was sustainable or appropriate. Andrew's taste for luxury, his expensive travel arrangements, and his apparent lack of awareness about public opinion had concerned Charles for years. The Royal Lodge situation represented everything Charles wanted to change about how the royal family operated in the 21st century. From Andrew's perspective, his brother's pressure to leave Royal Lodge felt like a betrayal of family loyalty and an abandonment of royal tradition. The Duke of York believed that Charles was allowing public opinion and media pressure to override the bonds of brotherhood and the established principles of royal property arrangements. Andrew's argument was straightforward. He had a legal lease, he was meeting his obligations under that lease, and his personal circumstances should not override his contractual rights. The psychological impact of the Royal Lodge dispute on Andrew could not be underestimated. Having lost his military titles, royal patronages, and public role, the mansion represented his last tangible connection to his former life as a prominent royal. Every room held memories of better times, of state occasions, and family celebrations, of a period when he was respected and valued. The thought of abandoning these memories and accepting a smaller residence felt like erasing the positive aspects of his royal career and accepting complete defeat. Sarah Ferguson's position in the Royal Lodge dispute added another layer of complexity to an already difficult situation. Andrew's ex-wife had continued to live at the property intermittently since their divorce, maintaining a close relationship with her former husband despite their changed marital status. Sarah's presence provided Andrew with emotional support during his battles with the media and legal system, but it also raised questions about the appropriateness of the arrangement and the true nature of their relationship. The Duchess of York's own reputation and business interests were closely tied to the Royal Lodge arrangement. Sarah had built a successful career as an author and television personality, often drawing on her royal connections and experiences. Royal Lodge provided her with a prestigious address and a connection to royal life that enhanced her commercial value. The loss of access to the property would represent a significant setback for her personal and professional interests. Andrew's daughters, Princess Beatrice and Princess Eugenie, found themselves in an uncomfortable position as their father's dispute with their uncle intensified. Both young women had grown up at Royal Lodge and maintained strong emotional connections to the property. However, as working members of the younger generation of royals, they also understood the importance of supporting King Charles and avoiding any appearance of disloyalty to the crown. The practical challenges of maintaining Royal Lodge continued to mount as Andrew's financial resources dwindled. The property's heating bills alone consumed tens of thousands of pounds each winter, while the extensive grounds required constant attention from a team of gardeners and groundskeepers. The mansion's historic character meant that any repairs or updates had to meet strict conservation standards, significantly increasing costs compared to ordinary residential properties. Security considerations remained a constant concern and expense for Andrew at Royal Lodge. The property's isolated location within Windsor Great Park required comprehensive protection measures, including perimeter security, surveillance systems, and regular police patrols. These arrangements, while necessary for Andrew's safety, consumed significant resources and highlighted the impracticality of maintaining such extensive security for a single non-working royal. The Crown Estate's position in the Royal Lodge dispute was carefully neutral, but increasingly concerned about the property's long-term future. While Andrew's lease provided him with legal protection, the organization recognized that his financial difficulties could eventually lead to maintenance problems that would damage the property's historic value. The Crown Estate preferred stable, financially secure tenants who could properly care for their prestigious properties. Legal experts following the Royal Lodge dispute noted the unusual nature of Andrew's lease agreement and the limited options available to either party. The 75-year term and specific maintenance obligations created a complex legal framework that could not be easily dissolved or modified. Any attempt by the Crown Estate to terminate the lease would likely face significant legal challenges and could establish unwelcome precedents for other royal property arrangements. The financial engineering required to sustain Andrew's position at Royal Lodge became increasingly creative and desperate as his traditional income sources disappeared. Reports suggested that the Duke of York was considering various options, including potential commercial partnerships, property development opportunities, and even tourism-related ventures that could generate income while allowing him to remain at the mansion. One of the most controversial suggestions involved opening parts of Royal Lodge to public tours, similar to arrangements at other royal properties. While this option could generate substantial income, it would fundamentally change the character of Andrew's private residence and potentially compromise his security arrangements. The prospect of tourists walking through his home represented another humiliation that Andrew was reluctant to accept. International property developers and investors reportedly approached Andrew with various proposals for monetizing Royal Lodge while allowing him to retain residency rights. These schemes range from sale and leaseback arrangements to complex partnership structures that would provide immediate capital in exchange for future property rights. However, most of these proposals would require approval from the Crown Estate, which was unlikely to be forthcoming given the king's clear preference for Andrew's departure. The media's fascination with the Royal Lodge dispute created additional pressure on all parties involved. Regular reports speculated about Andrew's financial situation, analyzed aerial photographs of the property for signs of decline, and tracked the movements of family members visiting the mansion. This intense scrutiny made any negotiated settlement more difficult by creating public expectations and political pressures that complicated private family discussions. Andrew's attempts to generate income through his connections and previous business relationships faced significant obstacles due to his damaged reputation. Many potential business partners were reluctant to associate with the Duke of York, fearing negative publicity and commercial backlash. This situation severely limited Andrew's options for finding new revenue streams that could sustain his lifestyle and property maintenance obligations. The staff at Royal Lodge, many of whom had worked for Andrew for years, faced increasing uncertainty about their future employment. Budget pressures led to reduced hours, eliminated positions, and increased workloads for remaining employees. The loyal service of these staff members, combined with their detailed knowledge of the property and Andrew's circumstances, created additional complications for any potential resolution of the dispute. King Charles's advisors continued to develop strategies for encouraging Andrew's departure from Royal Lodge while avoiding the appearance of forcing a family member from his home. These efforts included exploring alternative accommodation options beyond Frogmore Cottage, investigating potential financial arrangements that could ease Andrew's transition, and considering modifications to royal security protocols that might reduce the costs associated with protecting the Duke of York. The constitutional implications of the Royal Lodge dispute extended beyond family dynamics to questions about the proper relationship between working and non-working members of the royal family. Charles's approach to Andrew's situation would establish important precedents for how future monarchs might handle similar problems with non-working royals who retain titles and property rights but no official responsibilities. As 2024 approached, the Royal Lodge dispute showed no signs of resolution, with both brothers remaining committed to their positions despite the mounting personal and financial costs. Andrew's determination to retain his home appeared unshakable, while Charles's commitment to modernizing the monarchy seemed equally firm. The stage was set for a prolonged battle that would test not only their relationship, but the entire royal family's ability to manage internal conflicts while maintaining public confidence in the institution. The arrival of 2024 brought no resolution to the Royal Lodge standoff, but it had introduced new complications and unexpected developments that would reshape the dynamics of Andrew's battle to remain in his cherished home. The Duke of York's financial situation had reached a critical point where creative solutions and external assistance became not just desirable, but absolutely necessary for his survival at the mansion. The pressure from King Charles remained constant, but Andrew's responses became more desperate and unconventional as his options narrowed. Reports emerged suggesting that Andrew had begun exploring partnerships with wealthy individuals who might be willing to invest in his continued occupancy of Royal Lodge. These potential arrangements involved complex financial structures that could provide Andrew with the resources needed to maintain the property while offering investors various forms of return on their investment. However, any such partnerships would require careful vetting to ensure they did not compromise royal security or create inappropriate obligations that could damage the monarchy's reputation. The most significant development came when news leaked that a consortium of Middle Eastern businessmen had expressed interest in supporting Andrew's position at Royal Lodge through a complex financial arrangement. The proposed deal would involve significant upfront payments to Andrew in exchange for various commercial opportunities and potential future property rights. While the specific details remained confidential, royal watchers speculated that such an arrangement could provide Andrew with the financial stability he desperately needed. However, the involvement of foreign investors in Andrew's personal affairs raised serious concerns within the royal establishment and the British government. Security officials worried about the potential for foreign influence over a member of the royal family, even a non-working one. The proposed arrangement would require extensive background checks and security reviews that could take months to complete, assuming approval was even possible given the sensitive nature of royal property and security arrangements. King Charles's response to reports of Andrew's potential foreign financial backing was swift and decisive. The king made it clear through intermediaries that any such arrangement would be subject to the strictest scrutiny and would need to comply with all relevant security protocols and royal family guidelines. More importantly, Charles indicated that approval for such partnerships would depend on Andrew's willingness to engage in broader discussions about his future role and accommodation within the royal family. The king's position reflected a fundamental concern about the precedent that Andrew's situation might establish. If non-working members of the royal family could maintain expensive properties through foreign financial support, it could create security risks and inappropriate dependencies that would undermine the monarchy's independence and reputation. Charles preferred that Andrew accept alternative accommodation rather than become entangled in complex financial arrangements with foreign entities. Sarah Ferguson's involvement in Andrew's financial difficulties became more prominent during this period, with reports suggesting that she was actively helping to identify potential solutions and partnerships. The Duchess of York's business experience and international contacts made her a valuable ally in Andrew's struggle, but her involvement also raised questions about whether she was operating as an unofficial agent for royal interests or pursuing her own commercial opportunities. The physical condition of Royal Lodge became a more pressing concern as deferred maintenance began to show visible effects. Several roof repairs that had been postponed due to cost considerations could no longer be delayed, forcing Andrew to spend significant sums from his dwindling reserves. The property's heating system also required urgent attention, with estimates suggesting that replacement costs could exceed £100,000. These unexpected expenses further strained Andrew's finances and provided additional ammunition for those arguing that his position at the mansion was unsustainable. Princess Beatrice and Princess Eugenie faced increasing pressure to intervene in their father's dispute with their uncle, but both young women carefully maintained their neutrality while expressing private support for their father's position. The princesses understood that any public statement supporting Andrew could damage their own relationships with King Charles and potentially affect their children's future positions within the royal family. Their silence on the matter spoke volumes about the difficult position Andrew's situation had created for the entire family. The Crown Estate's patience with the Royal Lodge situation began to show signs of strain as the organization faced questions about its management of royal properties and the appropriateness of allowing such a high-profile dispute to continue indefinitely. While Andrew's lease provided him with legal protection, the Crown Estate had other tools at its disposal, including the ability to require detailed financial disclosures and proof of ability to meet future obligations under the lease agreement. Legal experts noted that the Crown Estate could potentially invoke certain clauses in Andrew's lease that required him to demonstrate ongoing financial capacity to maintain the property to required standards. If Andrew could not provide satisfactory evidence of his ability to meet future maintenance obligations, the Crown Estate might have grounds to question the continuation of the lease arrangement. However, such action would likely provoke a legal battle that could take years to resolve and generate significant negative publicity for all parties involved. The media's coverage of the Royal Lodge dispute intensified during early 2024, with several investigative reports examining Andrews' finances and potential sources of future funding. These stories often included detailed analysis of the property's maintenance costs, the Duke of York's known income sources, and speculation about how long he could realistically maintain his current lifestyle. The constant media attention made any private negotiations more difficult and increased pressure on King Charles to take decisive action. Public opinion polls consistently showed little sympathy for Andrew's position, with most Britons believing that he should accept alternative accommodation rather than continue living in luxury at Royal Lodge. The contrast between Andrew's struggles to maintain a mansion and ordinary citizens' housing difficulties during a cost-of-living crisis created particularly negative optics for the royal family. This public sentiment provided additional justification for King Charles's efforts to resolve the situation quickly. International observers continued to watch the Royal Lodge dispute with fascination, seeing it as a test case for how modern monarchies handle internal conflicts and financial difficulties. European royal families, many of which had undergone significant streamlining in recent decades, viewed Charles's approach as necessary modernization that would strengthen the British monarchy's long-term sustainability. However, some critics argued that the king's treatment of his brother appeared harsh and undermined the principle of family loyalty that traditionally characterized royal relationships. The security implications of Andrew's potential financial partnerships received increasing attention from intelligence services and royal protection officers. Any significant foreign investment in Andrew's affairs would require comprehensive security reviews to ensure that no inappropriate influence or access was created. The complexity of these reviews meant that even approved arrangements could take months to implement, during which time Andrew's financial pressures would continue to mount. Andrew's exploration of commercial opportunities to generate income while remaining at Royal Lodge led to several controversial proposals that highlighted the desperation of his situation. One suggestion involved establishing a private members' club within part of the mansion, allowing wealthy individuals to access exclusive facilities in exchange for significant membership fees. Another proposal considered hosting corporate events and private functions that could generate substantial income while theoretically maintaining the property's residential character. However, all such commercial ventures would require extensive modifications to Royal Lodge and potentially compromise Andrew's privacy and security arrangements. The planning permissions and regulatory approvals required for any commercial use of the property would likely take years to obtain, assuming they could be obtained at all given the property's location within Windsor Great Park and its historic significance. The emotional toll of the prolonged dispute on Andrew became increasingly evident to those who knew him well. Friends and former colleagues reported that the Duke of York appeared stressed and isolated, spending long hours alone in his study while contemplating his limited options. The contrast between his current circumstances and his former life as a prominent royal weighed heavily on him, particularly during quiet moments when the full extent of his fall from grace became undeniable. As spring approached, the Royal Lodge dispute had become a defining issue for King Charles's early reign, testing his commitment to modernizing the monarchy while maintaining family unity. The king's advisors urged decisive action to resolve the situation before it caused further damage to royal reputation and family relationships. However, Andrew's continued resistance and the legal complexities of his lease arrangement meant that any resolution would require careful planning and possibly significant compromise from both brothers. The spring of 2024 marked a turning point in the Royal Lodge saga, as the sustainability of Prince Andrew's position finally reached a breaking point that could no longer be ignored by any of the parties involved. The Duke of York's financial situation had deteriorated to such an extent that even his most creative attempts at finding alternative funding sources were proving inadequate to meet the mounting costs of maintaining his cherished home. The mansion that had once symbolized his royal status was increasingly becoming a magnificent prison that trapped him in an impossible cycle of debt and desperation. The first major crack in Andrew's defenses came when several key staff members at Royal Lodge were forced to seek alternative employment due to irregular salary payments and reduced working hours. The departure of longtime employees, some of whom had worked for Andrew for over a decade, sent shockwaves through the royal community and provided concrete evidence of the Duke's declining circumstances. These loyal staff members had been the backbone of Royal Lodge's operation, maintaining its standards and preserving its dignity even as resources dwindled. The loss of experienced staff created a cascade of problems for Andrew, as the property's maintenance standards began to slip in ways that were visible to outside observers. The gardens, once immaculately maintained to showcase the property's grandeur, showed signs of neglect as the reduced groundskeeping team struggled to cover the vast 98-acre estate. More concerning were reports of deferred maintenance on the mansion itself, with several important repairs being postponed indefinitely due to cost considerations. King Charles's patience with the situation finally reached its limit when security officials raised serious concerns about the implications of Andrew's financial difficulties. The reduced staffing at Royal Lodge created potential security vulnerabilities, while Andrew's desperate search for financial partners risked exposing the royal family to inappropriate foreign influence. The king's advisors made it clear that the situation had moved beyond a simple family property dispute to become a potential national security concern. The breakthrough in the deadlock came from an unexpected source. Princess Eugenie, Andrew's younger daughter, who had remained publicly silent about her father's situation, but had been working privately to find a face-saving resolution for all parties. Eugenie's intervention was motivated not just by concern for her father, but also by her understanding of the damage the prolonged dispute was causing to the entire royal family's reputation and unity. Eugenie's proposal involved a complex arrangement that would allow Andrew to retain a connection to Royal Lodge while acknowledging the reality of his changed circumstances. Under her plan, Andrew would maintain a private apartment within the mansion while the main areas of the house would be managed by the Crown Estate for official royal functions and potentially limited public access. This arrangement would significantly reduce Andrew's financial obligations while allowing him to remain in the home that had become so central to his identity. The proposal required delicate negotiations between multiple parties, including the Crown Estate, King Charles's representatives, and Andrew's legal team. The arrangement would involve restructuring Andrew's lease obligations, with the Crown Estate taking direct responsibility for the property's major maintenance and operational costs in exchange for greater control over its use and management. Andrew would retain private accommodation and continued access to the grounds, but would surrender his exclusive control over the entire property. For King Charles, Eugenie's proposal offered several advantages that made it worth serious consideration. The arrangement would resolve the financial sustainability issues that had made Andrew's position untenable while avoiding the appearance of forcing his brother from the family home. The Crown Estate would benefit from having greater control over a significant royal property that could serve multiple purposes, including official functions and potentially revenue-generating activities. Andrew's initial reaction to his daughter's proposal was one of resistance, as it still represented a significant loss of status and control over his living situation. However, the reality of his financial position left him with few alternatives. The choice had become clear: accept a modified arrangement that would allow him to remain at Royal Lodge in some capacity, or face the inevitable prospect of being forced to leave entirely when his resources were finally exhausted. The negotiation process revealed just how precarious Andrew's situation had become. Financial documents disclosed during the discussions showed that the Duke of York had been drawing down his savings at an unsustainable rate and was facing the prospect of bankruptcy within 2 years if no solution was found. The revelation shocked even Andrew's critics, who had not fully understood the extent of his financial difficulties. Sarah Ferguson played a crucial role in convincing Andrew to consider Eugenie's proposal seriously. The Duchess of York understood better than anyone the psychological impact that losing Royal Lodge would have on her former husband, but she also recognized that compromise was preferable to complete defeat. Her influence helped Andrew move beyond his initial rejection of any modification to his living arrangements and begin to consider alternatives that could preserve some elements of his desired lifestyle. The technical aspects of restructuring Andrew's relationship with Royal Lodge proved complex and time-consuming. Legal experts had to carefully review the existing lease agreement to determine which elements could be modified without invalidating the entire arrangement. The Crown Estate's lawyers worked to ensure that any new agreement would provide them with the flexibility they needed to manage the property effectively while protecting Andrew's legitimate interests. Security considerations played a major role in shaping the final arrangement. The proposed changes to Royal Lodge's use and management required comprehensive review of protection protocols and potential vulnerabilities. The reduced private area that Andrew would occupy could be secured more efficiently than the entire mansion, potentially reducing the overall security costs associated with his protection while maintaining appropriate safety standards. The announcement of the Royal Lodge settlement, when it finally came, was carefully crafted to preserve dignity for all parties while acknowledging the changed realities of Andrew's situation. The official statement emphasized the collaborative nature of the solution and the benefits it would provide for the long-term preservation and use of this historic royal property. Andrew was described as willingly accepting modifications to his living arrangements in the interest of family unity and royal duty. Public reaction to the resolution was generally positive, with most commentators praising King Charles for finding a solution that avoided forcing his brother into complete homelessness while still addressing the legitimate concerns about Andrew's unsustainable lifestyle. The arrangement was seen as a reasonable compromise that reflected the realities of modern royal life, while respecting traditional family loyalties. For Andrew personally, the settlement represented both defeat and relief. He had been forced to surrender much of what Royal Lodge had meant to him, including his exclusive control over the property and his status as its primary occupant. However, he retained a connection to the home where he had spent the happiest years of his royal life and avoided the complete humiliation of being forced to leave entirely. The implementation of the new arrangement proceeded gradually, allowing Andrew time to adjust to his reduced circumstances while ensuring that the transition did not create additional family tensions. The Crown Estate began taking direct responsibility for the property's major systems and grounds maintenance, relieving Andrew of financial burdens that had threatened to overwhelm him entirely. As autumn returned to Royal Lodge, the property began a new chapter in its long history. Andrew remained in residence, occupying a comfortable but significantly smaller portion of the mansion he had once controlled entirely. The gardens continued to bloom under professional management, and the historic rooms were preserved and maintained to the high standards befitting a royal residence. The solution was far from perfect, but it had prevented a complete catastrophe while allowing all parties to retain some measure of dignity. The Royal Lodge dispute had revealed important truths about the modern monarchy's challenges and limitations. It demonstrated that even royal status could not protect individuals from the consequences of poor decisions and financial mismanagement. However, it also showed that creative solutions could be found for seemingly impossible problems when family members work together in good faith to find common ground. For the wider royal family, the resolution of Andrew's housing crisis provided valuable lessons about balancing tradition with practical necessity, family loyalty with institutional responsibility, and private interests with public expectations. King Charles had successfully navigated his first major family crisis as monarch, establishing important precedents for how future challenges would be handled while preserving the essential unity of the royal house. The mansion itself, with its pink walls and magnificent gardens, continued to stand as a symbol of royal grandeur and continuity. Royal Lodge had survived another transition in its long history, adapting to changed circumstances while maintaining its essential character and dignity. In the end, the property that had witnessed so much royal drama had proven more enduring than any individual's claim to exclusive ownership, serving as a reminder that the monarchy itself was always larger than any single member's personal struggles or defeats.